All right, so project 34 of the day is installing a new winch on the Pioneer. This is an old Hyper Tough 5500 Walmart winch. It's been in there since the beginning of 2022. It actually did pretty good. It was always kind of weak. Now the brushes are screwed up. I rebuilt it one time on the side of the trail to get it going again, and it just barely works. So compared to the Harbor Freight Apex 5500, the motor is way bigger. It is longer, it is bigger diameter. That's good to see. The free spool feels beefier. This is like a metal knob on here now, which is cool. This free spool stopped working almost immediately. You might be able to see why if you look in there. This winch is obviously not sealed great. The gearbox has been full of mud for quite some time, but it was still working. I was pulling people out of Busco Beach with it. So out with the old, in with the new. Went with Harbor Freight because it's local to me. So if the winch fails, I can get a replacement same day. They usually have these in stock. I like the Warren winches too, and there's some decent deals on them. But for $270 with synthetic rope, I had to test it out. Usually the synthetic rope that comes on all these winches isn't the best. I like to use AM steel. This is some yellow AM steel I had on that old winch. I'm going to save that as a winch extension because that's $100 worth of rope right there. That stuff's really good. Even though it looks beat up, it's still very strong. So because I'm just installing a new winch, I don't have to redo all my wiring. I'm going to reuse the same wiring. I looked at the size of the wiring. It's pretty similar. The other winch I had was also 5500. So it's not like I'm using real small wires or anything. So pretty similar gauge wire, probably about the same. Of course, I'm going to save all this in case someone else needs it or whatever. But yeah, I don't have to do any wiring, which is good. I'm already using the OEM Honda winch switch, which is super nice in the dash. So, you know, that's all good there. I might add wireless control to this eventually. I have it on the Pioneer 500, and it does come in handy when you're by yourself to be able to reel the winch out, reel it back in without having to go all the way to shore, as it were. But yeah, so pulled the front bumper off. A lot of Busco Beach mud fell out of here. Stuff dries like concrete. You can get a good look at a lot of stuff once you get the front bumper off. Front bumper comes off easy. It's just 6 bolts. And this is a goofy kind of winch mount I've been using for a while. It does work, but you can see it's slightly bent. And this bolt's on here like this. So this plate ties into your front diff mount, and then this ties into these mounts over here. It all kind of sandwiches together like that. It's worked okay. I might tack weld a few things because it's kind of wonky and bent now, but it'll be fine. I always mount my winches down low. I know that puts them in the water more, but it helps the center of gravity, and that is important to me. I'd rather not flip over. I'm gonna put the winch in. All I really gotta do is bolt it to the plate, hook up 2 wires. But I'll do a bunch of testing with it. I recover people all day long, and I'll let you guys know if I have any feedback. It's got a 90-day warranty on it. You can pay for a year or 2 year. I didn't bother. But yeah, it looks big and beefy, so hopefully it's a lot more powerful than that thing. That winch was okay, but it was always kind of weak, so this should be fixing the problem. I suspect I will break this rope fairly soon, and I'll have to upgrade to some AM steel blue. But just to give it the best chance, I'm going to install the new fairlead that came with it, because that helps with the wear on the rope. And I'll use the fairlead that came with the rope to give it the best chance. I won't use this old fairlead. Another pro tip, I had to make 2 trips to Harbor Freight today because the first time I grabbed the short drum, you make sure you get the long drum winch, because if you don't, you won't have very much rope. So this one has 50 feet of 1/4 inch, 18.7 feet per minute. We're going to make a spreadsheet and go through all the specs. Don't worry, we love specs. Waterproof rating seems good. But yeah, so I didn't use the hook because I don't like winch hooks. I always put a soft shackle through the end of it like that, and that works just fine for me. It's all installed. Got the Badlands fairlead on there, and if you notice, let me make a video with the flashlight on. So if you notice, my winch is pretty low down. It comes up to the fairlead like that. Now that's not the best for wear and tear on your cable because the winch comes up a lot, but the way that winches are designed, you really should have the cable go to the bottom, especially with these larger winches. With a 3,000 pound, you can come off the top decently well. Come off the top, I'd have to remove this bar, and then I'd have to run the winch flipped around to have it the same direction. Removing that bar removes some stiffness, which can cause gearbox problems. Didn't want to do it. So yeah, there's a lot of angle where the winch comes through the fairlead, but the fairlead's nice and smooth, and the cable's not hitting anything else. There's no sharp edges back here it can grab. So I think it's fine. The other one worked well like that. It might contribute to some winch wear acceleration in the line, but I'll put AMSUL on it regardless eventually. So there's that. But yeah, it's all installed. I'll let you hear how it sounds. It runs pretty smooth. Let's show you the free spool. Feels really nice. Free spool's out, very easy, very little force required to free spool it. Lock it back in. Clunk. And key on in. Sounds pretty good to me. You can see how fast it goes. It's not terribly fast, but these bigger winches never really are that fast. You have to have a good gear reduction. So it's got a 3-stage planetary reduction on there. I think there's a good cutaway picture on this box somewhere. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. Got your motor, automatic brake, corrosion protection, waterproof design. There's your 3 planetary gear stacks. Pretty cool. Comes with a winch cutoff switch, like you might have seen me put on my Honda Talon a while ago. LOL. Harbor Freight definitely watches my videos. But yeah, pretty cool. And this is an interesting chart. A lot of people don't understand this. So this is how much pull you have and what your feet per second is at different current draws. So that's pretty cool. And then down here, it shows you the layers. So when you have 4 layers on the winch, you only have a 3,500 pound winch. When you have 1 layer on the winch, you have a 5,500 pound winch. As the rope stacks up on top of itself, you effectively have a higher gear ratio. That's also why the winch spins the same speed, but it pulls the rope in faster once the spool is full. A lot of people don't understand that, but it's in every winch manual. These are good to read, very good to look at. But yeah, we'll test the crap out of this thing. Obviously, the motor looks huge, but it's still fit in there and cleared all my brackets and stuff just barely. It's actually pretty close to a few things. You see that I don't have boots on here, right? You should have the little rubber boots for arcing protection. I find that they get full of mud and then they rust out my contacts, so I leave them off. That is dangerous. Don't do that. Yeah, gotta make sure there's a pulley in this thing, a soft shackle pulley. I have one somewhere. It might be in the Can-Am. I don't know. Gotta find it because you gotta have a soft shackle and a low friction ring if you're gonna try to pull out a truck or another side-by-side. All right, here's where it gets nerdy. Trying to spend too much time on this because I know a lot of people don't care. But we're going to talk about these 3 winches first. These are the side-by-side winches, the wide spools for the bigger rope. And then we'll talk about the ATV winches over here, like I just did on the Rubicon. So starting with the side-by-side winches, I've got the specs for the Apex 5500, the Warren 45S. That's like a cheaper Vantage winch, an older one. And then the Warren Axon 5500. The reason I did both of these is because this Axon is like a different type of winch. It's got a built-in solenoid. It's really big. It's really heavy. So I wanted to include both the specs here. Horsepower is pretty relevant. Usually a lie. Duty cycle, Harbor Freight says it's 5%. Warren doesn't really say it anymore in their specs, but it's understood that it's about 5%, I believe. The most important thing to look at is the ratio. So you can see that the Apex 55 and the Warren 45 have about a 200-to-1 ratio with the planetary gears. But the Axon has a much lower ratio of about 240-to-1. That's why I like these winches. They're geared really low, and that means that at your maximum loading, they draw less current. So let's talk about that. So down here we got line pull. So this tells you if you're pulling 0 pounds, how many feet per minute it can spool in. The Apex is very fast, which is nice when you're sucking your line back in after a recovery. And the reason it's fast is because it's got a powerful motor, and it's not geared as low as the Warren. So that makes sense. However, if you look down here at current draw per load, if we go to the higher loadings, like max load, 5,500 pounds of pull, your Harbor Freight winch is going to be trying to pull 291 amps, where your Warren winch is only going to be pulling 254. That's because it's got a lower gear ratio, so it can make the torque without as much current. That's good for your battery and your charging system and everything else. So it also keeps the winch from bogging down and makes it more reliable, in my opinion. But yeah, I think the Harbor Freight winch is a pretty good one. This is their latest gen. It's got the good waterproof rating, just like the Warrens do. It's very fast, got a big motor on it. I wish it was geared a little bit lower, but hey, it's fine. All right, switching over to the Harbor Freight and the Warren ATV winches. So I just installed an Axon 35 on my Rubicon. Again, it's a really big, oversized winch. It was very hard to mount, but I do like them a lot. And if you look at the ratios here, we can see, again, the reason I like them. So the Axon is geared about 170 to 1, whereas the Harbor Freight 3500 is only geared 136 to 1. Now this Apex 3500 is not quite as updated as the Apex 5500. You can see that it's got the lower waterproof rating. It doesn't have a synthetic option. They only come with wire rope. So hopefully Harbor Freight will update this eventually and make it a little more comparable with the Warren. That's one of the reasons I didn't go with the Apex 3500 is because it's not as waterproof, and I've seen them get water in them, and their ratio is pretty high. Now, as you'd expect with a higher ratio, it has a much higher speed at 0 pounds of force, so 23 feet per minute. It's really quick. But if you look down here at max pull at 3,500 pounds of load, it's actually a lot slower than the Warren. And that's because the Warren's got a more powerful motor and a lower gear ratio, so it's not bogging down. And that just makes the winch feel a lot more premium. So that's why I like this winch so much. Yeah, as current draw, same story as over here. The Harbor Freight winch is going to draw more current because it's not geared as low. And it's got an older school motor, so the Warren's going to be pulling 200 amps at 3,500 pounds of line pull, whereas the Harbor Freight's going to be pulling 232 amps. Now, how much can you trust these numbers? Maybe not great, because they depend on a lot of things, like the size of your battery, how you run your cables. You're going to have voltage drop. That's going to affect things, charging system, etc. But it is good to look at this stuff. The number one thing I look at when buying a winch is the ratio of the planetary gear stack. Okay, today's project is to try to jam this giant Warren Axon 3500 off of my Can-Am. This is on my 700 onto this Rubicon. There's not a ton of space for a winch. The winch has to mount in the front bumper, basically in this area, and I'm not sure if that monster is going to fit. If it doesn't fit in here, plan B will be to go buy a Harbor Freight 3500. Now, I really like these Warren Axon winches. The contactor solenoid's built into the winch, so there's very little wiring to do. They're very waterproof. They have a very low gear. They're very strong. They're probably too strong to mount to this flimsy bumper and this flimsy, cheapo winch mount that people use on these Hondas. It's very thin steel. And the geometry is kind of weird, but we're going to give it a shot, and I'll tell you if it works or not. I'm definitely going to need both hands, so you're not going to be able to see me install it, but I will give you some feedback. Another thing to do while your bumper's off is drill some more holes. So the top of this tube is open, which means that water gets in here, but water also gets in this loop right here somehow. And every time you take them off, you'll notice a big puddle of water comes out of the bumper. So I drilled some more holes in it to allow it to drain. That water sitting in there will rust the bumper out. Honda puts a hole here and here. That is not enough. To further illustrate my point, that puddle of water and all of this water came out of the bumper once I drilled a hole right here and a hole right there. So this entire tube was full of water. All right, so the quick update, the winch does fit into the bracket just barely. So in this configuration, the winch ends up mounting upside down. You can see that it's touching the bars there, and you can just barely get the fasteners in. The slots are all the way maxed out, but it is in there. So the next thing to do is see if it'll fit into the frame or if it's going to cause some interferences with the frame mounts, which I kind of think it might. All right, so we're not having much success. As you can see, those bolts are not very close to lining up on the top of the bumper, and that's because this winch is so dang big. If you look down here, see that the winch is contacting the frame before all the mounts can line up. So this winch is really just too big to fit in the location on these Hondas. So that means this winch won't work on a lot of things, like the 420s, etc. If you've ever done a winch in these, you know it's kind of a pain in the ass even if you have the right winch. So what I do is I put those bottom two bolts in, and I actually swing the bumper up and hinge it in place. The only problem with that is these two fender brackets kind of get in the way. So you have to kind of pull the fenders out around them, pull the plastics out a little bit. But basically I lay the bumper on the ground upside down, hook those two bolts, and fold it all the way up. That's what I'm talking about, hinging it up. So I just put those two bolts in, then I swing it up, pull the plastics out around these arms right here. That's how I do it. Yep. The only way I could make this work is to grind off a lot of material here on the back of the winch. All right, I lied. I got the winch in there, mostly because I'm like a victory at all cost kind of guy, and I don't accept no for an answer. So, you can see there's a bunch of grinding that happened back in here. You can kind of see it right there. It is flush against the frame. It is flush against this bar and it is flush against that bar. So no, it does not fit. You would do a ton of grinding to make that happen. I still have to waller out those holes with a burr to get those bolts in. But this bolt is in, and these bolts are in, and it is tight as hell. So I do quite a lot of grinding onto the motor housing and the gearbox housing on this side. You can see about run out of aluminum there, so I'm going to put some ultra black to make sure I didn't compromise the sealing. Maybe the winch will break in half and you guys can laugh at me. But those two parts right there sit right against this frame. So that was required to make it fit because it's just too big. But yeah, and all I got to do is put the new rope on it, waller out these holes, and bolt it all together and then wire it up. Again, I do not recommend this. I happen to have this winch sitting around, so I'm making it work. This is probably a dumb idea, just like most of the things I do. All right, we've got about 200 feet of brand new am steel in here. We're only gonna wind up about 40 feet onto this because it's a narrow spool. I don't like having to fight with it balling up on top of itself. 50 feet is nice, but I usually put 40 feet on the spool and a couple feet up to the rack, and that's all I do to keep it nice. This is how I do all my winches, make a wrap around it, go underneath, and then I put some electrical tape here to hold this down. But this is how I attach all my spools. If you're confused about this, it's because it's confusing, and there's a whole separate video on it. So yeah. Okie dokie, the Rubicon winch is complete. We have out, in. It's got this fancy indicator on here from Warren that tells you if your winch is overloaded and can flash codes and stuff. Never really overloaded this winch. It's been very strong. It's geared low, so no issues there. And here's how it looks down here. I had to trim the plastic a little bit to fit around it. It's definitely stuffed in there. It can't shift around because it's already touching everything. It's touching the frame, it's touching the bars. It's really stuck in there. Wires routed nice out of the way. Straight back to the battery. There's a zigzag here. I need to add another zip tie right there. Now that I'm looking at it, took up some slack by making a zigzag. And then it goes straight to the battery because there's no contactor. It's part of the winch. I installed the East Lake ball joints and they are crap. After one ride, this ball joint has 3 or 4 millimeters of up and down play internal to the joint. So those will be going in the trash soon, and I'll be putting some OEM ball joints. It looks like I have another CV boot rip over here. Yep, that's excellent. Had a lot of boot issues on this thing. A little update on those ball joints. So I emailed Eastlake on eBay, and I messaged them and said, hey, I got a defective ball joint. And they said, oh, we can't do anything on eBay. You need to call us. That's always a bad sign. That's sketchy. You should do your messaging through eBay. I called them anyway, and they said, oh, yeah, we can warranty that for you, but it's a $10 fee. I'm like, this is like a $10 ball joint. I'm not going to pay $10 to get another potentially questionable ball joint from you guys. Obviously, their cost on the ball joint is probably like $1. Their shipping cost is probably like $1. So they're still making money when they send out their warranty stuff. So I won't be doing business with them again. I gave them their axles a long time ago, but yeah, questionable customer service, and 1 out of 4 products failed after the first ride. So these ball joints are junk.